He thought his dark secret was buried forever, but when a dead teenager resurfaced years later, his entire web of lies unraveled, exposing a twisted brotherhood of murder that shocked the world. In the summer of 1998, the quiet town of Meadow Falls in northern Michigan was the kind of place where doors stayed unlocked and everyone knew their neighbors. That sense of safety shattered when 16-year-old Tina Brooks failed to return home after a school picnic. Her parents searched frantically through the night, knocking on every door and calling every friend, but she seemed to have vanished into thin air. 2 days later, her body was found in a wooded area off Highway 19, her hands bound, her shoes missing, and no sign of who had done it. Shock rippled through the community, leaving parents afraid to let their children out of sight. Just 3 weeks later, another girl, Dawn Miller, disappeared on her way home from a part-time job at a local diner. Her bicycle was found near the same highway where Tina's body had been discovered. Investigators scoured the area for clues but found only tire marks and a single earring tangled in the grass. The similarities between the two cases sent detectives scrambling for connections. Rumors spread quickly. Some blamed drifters, others whispered about a local hunter gone mad. When 17-year-old Linda Hayes vanished 6 weeks later after attending a county fair, fear became hysteria. Her remains were found in an abandoned quarry 10 miles from town. The pattern was undeniable now. 3 teenage girls, all taken at night, all found near the same stretch of highway, each showing the same signs of strangulation. The media dubbed the unknown killer the Highway Phantom, a name that echoed across Michigan like a curse. As investigators flooded Meadow Falls, the town's peace was replaced by suspicion. Neighbors began watching one another, locking doors, and wondering who among them could be capable of such horror. Detective Carl Rivers had been in law enforcement for over 20 years when the Highway Phantom murders landed on his desk. He was methodical, patient, and respected for his ability to see patterns where others saw chaos. Yet this case tested every skill he had. Weeks turned into months as he followed leads that led nowhere. Witnesses gave conflicting stories, and evidence seemed to vanish as soon as it appeared. Every time he thought he was close, the trail went cold. He interviewed dozens of locals, truck drivers, and travelers who used Highway 19, but none had seen anything useful. The few fingerprints found on the victims' belongings didn't match anyone in the system. The town's fear deepened with every unsolved clue. Parents refused to let their children walk alone. Teenagers avoided nighttime gatherings. Patrol cars circled neighborhoods long after dark, but the killer never struck again. Rivers spent sleepless nights in his office, surrounded by crime scene photos and maps covered in pins and notes. He believed the murderer was someone local, someone blending in, hiding behind normalcy. Yet there was no proof. His superiors grew impatient, demanding results he couldn't deliver. By 2001, 3 long years after the first murder, the case was officially declared cold. The files were boxed and stored in the department's archives, gathering dust alongside other forgotten tragedies. Detective Rivers retired shortly after, his spirit worn down by guilt and failure. He moved to a small cabin near the lake, trying to leave the memories behind, but the faces of Tina, Dawn, and Linda haunted him. Meadow Falls slowly returned to routine, its wounds hidden but not healed. The highway remained quiet, its dark stretches carrying the silence of secrets no one had yet uncovered. In 2011, more than a decade after the last victim was found, the Highway Phantom murders resurfaced in the strangest way. A small true crime YouTube channel decided to cover the forgotten case, piecing together old news footage and police reports. The video was simple: grainy clips of detectives, faded photos of the victims, and a narrator questioning why justice had never been served. It caught fire overnight, gaining millions of views within weeks. Viewers became amateur investigators, combing through every detail and speculating on who the killer might have been. Some pointed to truckers, others to locals with dark pasts. The comments section filled with theories, arguments, and sorrowful memories from those who still remembered the girls. Then one comment stood out among the noise. It came from a user named Don Still Here, who wrote, "You don't know what really happened. I was there. You got the wrong man." At first, people assumed it was a tasteless joke or another internet hoax. But the tone was chillingly specific. The user claimed to remember the van, the rope, and the woods behind the quarry. A few online sleuths tried to trace the account, but it was anonymous. Still, the comment gained attention, drawing curiosity from journalists and retired officers. 2 weeks later, the comment disappeared, and the account was deleted. But not before someone captured screenshots and forwarded them to the Michigan State Police. When detectives traced the IP address, they found it belonged to a woman living just 30 miles from Meadow Falls. Her name was Dawn Peterson. The discovery stunned investigators, especially when they learned that her birth date matched the missing Dawn Miller, one of the supposed victims. It raised a terrifying question: had one of the Highway Phantom's victims somehow survived? When detectives located Dawn Peterson, she was living quietly in a small lakeside town under a different name. She worked part-time at a local library and lived alone in a modest house filled with old books and unopened letters. When questioned, she calmly explained that she wasn't Dawn Miller, the girl believed to have been murdered in 1998, but she had once been known by that name. Her story left investigators speechless. She claimed that she had been attacked by the man police had hunted for years and that she had barely survived. According to her, on the night she disappeared, she accepted a ride home from a man she recognized from the neighborhood. He seemed kind and harmless, but once she got into his van, the atmosphere changed. She remembered a sharp smell of gasoline, a thick rope on the floor, and a sudden blow to her head. When she regained consciousness, she was lying in a forest clearing, her wrists raw and bleeding. The man had assumed she was dead and left her there. Disoriented and terrified, she stumbled through the woods for hours until she reached a remote cabin. The man who lived there, an elderly recluse, found her collapsed near his door. Out of fear and trauma, she never told him her real name, only saying she had been attacked. The recluse nursed her back to health, and after his death years later, she created a new identity and moved on with her life, believing her past was buried forever. It wasn't until she saw the YouTube documentary that she realized her story had been twisted by time. She had been declared dead, her name engraved on a memorial stone, but she had survived, and she was ready to reveal everything. Dawn's testimony reignited the Highway Phantom investigation with a force no one expected. Detectives reopened old files, re-examined evidence, and sent degraded samples for modern DNA testing. What they discovered would rewrite everything. A partial DNA match from beneath Tina Brooks's fingernails finally returned a result. It linked to an unsolved assault from 1997 involving a suspect named Leonard Case, a local mechanic who had never been charged. He had lived in Meadow Falls at the time of the murders and owned a white panel van identical to the one Dawn described. After the killing stopped, he abruptly sold his shop and disappeared across state lines. The timing was too perfect to ignore. Investigators quietly tracked him to a small town in Ohio, where he had changed his name to Leonard Chase and opened an auto repair business. By all accounts, he was a model citizen, polite, hardworking, and involved in community charity events. His neighbors described him as a man who never caused trouble and often helped fix cars for free. But behind that calm exterior, detectives believed, was the man responsible for 3 teenage deaths and 1 failed murder. Surveillance began immediately. Officers watched him for weeks, noting his routine, work, church, groceries, and solitary evenings at home. He never seemed to have visitors or close friends. The FBI joined the investigation, piecing together old records and matching photos from the 1990s. Finally, after months of monitoring, a judge approved a search warrant. Detectives approached his property early one morning, heart pounding with the weight of years of unanswered questions. What they found inside would confirm every dark suspicion and expose the twisted mind that had haunted Meadow Falls for over a decade. The Highway Phantom finally had a name, and he was still hiding in plain sight. The search of Leonard Case's property began just after dawn. Detectives moved carefully through his small Ohio home, taking photos of every room. At first, nothing seemed unusual. His house was clean, his garage organized, and his life appeared perfectly ordinary. But when one officer noticed a heavy padlock on a storage shed behind the garage, everything changed. Leonard hesitated when asked for the key, claiming it contained only tools and spare parts. The detectives broke the lock open. Inside were neatly stacked boxes, each labeled with a date from the late 1990s. The air smelled of oil, dust, and something else, old decay. When the boxes were opened, the room fell silent. Inside were personal items belonging to the missing girls, a broken bracelet engraved with Tina's initials, a school ID card belonging to Linda, and a diary that matched the handwriting in evidence photos from Dawn's old bedroom. Beneath the boxes, officers found a wooden crate hidden under the floorboards. It contained a faded photo album labeled "My Girls." Each page showed photographs of young women taken from a distance, some smiling on their way home from school, others unaware they were being watched. Leonard was handcuffed on the spot. He didn't resist or speak a word. When questioned, he claimed he had found the items years ago inside an abandoned vehicle and kept them out of curiosity. Detectives didn't believe him. The meticulous organization, the hidden album, and the labeled boxes told a different story. Forensic experts later confirmed fingerprints on the victims' belongings matched Leonard's. The news spread quickly, shocking both Meadow Falls and his quiet Ohio community. For years, everyone had believed the highway phantom had vanished, but he had only changed his name and waited for the world to forget. The trial of Leonard Case began in the spring of 2013 and immediately captured national attention. Reporters filled the courtroom, and every seat was taken by locals, survivors' families, and curious onlookers. Prosecutors presented Leonard as a patient predator who had stalked his victims for weeks before striking. They showed jurors the items found in his shed, each one tied to a missing girl, and projected the eerie "My Girls" photo album onto a large screen. The images were haunting, proof of an obsession that had lasted years. Forensic analysts testified about the DNA matches and fingerprints, while behavioral experts described Leonard as a man who lived a double life, outwardly calm but driven by control and fear. The defense tried to create doubt. They argued the evidence was circumstantial, suggesting it could have been planted or misinterpreted after decades of storage. They pointed out that Leonard had no prior record and had built a respected life in Ohio. They claimed the surviving witness, Dawn Peterson, was unreliable after so many years, her memories distorted by trauma and media influence. But when Dawn took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. Her quiet, steady account of that night left jurors visibly shaken. She described the van's cracked dashboard, the smell of oil, the faint radio static, all details later confirmed by forensic photos. After 2 weeks of testimony and only 4 hours of deliberation, the jury found Leonard Case guilty on all counts. He showed no emotion as the sentence was read: life in prison without parole. Families of the victims wept in relief, believing justice had finally been served. For Meadow Falls, the nightmare that had haunted its history seemed to have ended at last. But beneath the surface, one truth still waited to be uncovered. Months after Leonard Case began serving his life sentence, peace slowly returned to Meadow Falls. The headlines faded, the memorials grew quiet, and families tried to heal. Then, one evening in late autumn, news broke that shattered the fragile calm. Another teenage girl had gone missing from a nearby town, just 40 miles away. Her body was discovered 3 days later near an abandoned sawmill, her injuries and the method of restraint eerily identical to those of Tina, Dawn, and Linda. The details were too precise to dismiss as coincidence. The ligature marks, the positioning of the body, even the absence of shoes, it was as if the highway phantom had returned from the grave. Detectives were baffled. Leonard Case was locked away under strict surveillance. There was no possible way he could have committed the new crime. Investigators began to question everything they thought they knew. Had Leonard been wrongly convicted? Or was someone copying his crimes to keep the terror alive? Old reports were reopened, interviews re-examined, and new forensic teams were brought in. When officers reviewed vintage surveillance tapes from the original case, a disturbing detail surfaced. On one of the grainy videos taken near Highway 19, a second figure could be seen in the background, just beyond Leonard's van. The discovery suggested he hadn't acted alone. The idea of an accomplice reignited fear throughout Michigan. Reporters swarmed the town, demanding answers. Prosecutors who had celebrated Leonard's conviction now faced growing doubt. For the families, the revelation was devastating. They had believed the monster was behind bars, but the new evidence implied that someone else had been there all along, someone still free, still watching, and still hunting in the shadows. The nightmare that Meadow Falls thought was over had only just begun. Weeks after the discovery of the new victim, Dawn Peterson began receiving strange mail. It started with small, unsettling things: a postcard with no message, a photo of a wooded trail near Meadow Falls, and once, an unmarked envelope containing a piece of red ribbon identical to the one she had worn the night she was abducted years ago. At first, she tried to dismiss it as harassment from an obsessed follower, but then a small brown package arrived at her doorstep with no return address. Inside was an old Polaroid photograph. It showed her as a teenager, unconscious in the back of the same van she had described in court. On the back of the photo, written in shaky handwriting, were 4 chilling words: "He wasn't alone." Dawn froze. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the message was unmistakable. Someone else had been there that night, someone who had survived, hidden, and waited. Investigators rushed to analyze the photo, confirming it was authentic and dated from the late 1990s. The paper type and ink matched materials used during the original investigation. Surveillance footage from around Dawn's home revealed a hooded figure leaving the package in her mailbox during the early hours of the morning. The man's face never appeared on camera. He had known exactly where the blind spots were. Detectives immediately connected the incident to the new murder, suspecting that the accomplice had resurfaced. Panic spread through the community again, and Dawn was placed under police protection. She couldn't sleep, haunted by memories she had tried to bury. If the real accomplice was still free, it meant the nightmare she had escaped wasn't over. The truth that had once seemed complete was unraveling fast, and the shadow behind the highway phantom was finally beginning to emerge. Nearly a year after the new murder, forensic analysts made a breakthrough that would finally reveal the truth behind the highway phantom. DNA collected from the ribbon found in the latest victim's hair was run through an expanded national database. When the results came back, the match stunned investigators. It wasn't Leonard Case's DNA, but his younger brother, Michael Case. Records showed that Michael had disappeared shortly after Leonard's arrest in 2001, leaving behind no forwarding address or trace of his whereabouts. It became clear that Leonard hadn't acted alone. The two brothers had worked together, one luring the victims and the other ensuring no witnesses survived. When police located Michael, he was living under a false name in a remote cabin deep within Wisconsin's forests. He had grown a thick beard, changed his appearance, and lived off odd jobs for cash. During the raid, officers found a box hidden beneath the floorboards containing photographs, rope, and newspaper clippings of the original murders. The items perfectly matched the methods of the highway phantom. When confronted with the evidence, Michael didn't deny it. He simply said he promised he'd take the blame. It was the final piece of the puzzle. Leonard had confessed silently through his actions, choosing to carry the burden of guilt to protect his brother. Michael Case was charged with multiple counts of murder and sentenced to death. Leonard, still imprisoned, died months later from heart failure before learning of his brother's capture. For Meadow Falls, the long, painful story finally came to an end. The families of Tina, Dawn, and Linda gathered one last time by the memorial near Highway 19, where fresh flowers replaced years of grief. Justice had taken decades, but the truth had finally risen from the shadows.